Hi there. Welcome back to the Self-Care Summit. I'm really excited today to have Dr. Keesha Ewers joining me today. And Dr. Keesha is a board-certified nurse practitioner who practices functional and integrative medicine. She's a doctor of sexology. She also has a specialty and training in Ayurvedic medicine, as well as being the founder and medical director for, I'm going to read my notes here, the Academy for Integrative Medicine Health Coach certification program, which we'll talk a little bit more about at the end. So Dr. Keesha has over 30 years in the medical field. So I'm thrilled that you're here with us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And what a great subject we're talking about today.
Yeah, I think everybody could use talking about self-care every day. So I always learn a lot from doing these interviews as well, because we don't ever do it perfect. And I think that's something that, even those of us who get up and teach this stuff all day long, I think it's important to kind of ground in the humanness of each of us and say, you know what, the reason we talk about it and the reason we teach it is so that we're reminded to practice.
Exactly. Exactly right.
Well, I've been doing all the talking. Tell me a little bit more about you and your story. Kind of how did you come into this field of work?
It's so funny because every one of us in this field has a story. And I always say, if you find a functional medicine or an integrative medicine practitioner, it's usually because they have a story where the Western model failed them in some way. And that's definitely true for me. I was actually straight Western medicine, had a great big adrenaline junkie, life that I loved in my professional career in the intensive care unit, and just loved it. And then I got sick one day, and this is what my patients describe this as: is all of a sudden, when we know that actually it takes anywhere from 10 to 30 years to really get a full-blown autoimmune disease. When I was 30, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, but it was this sort of overnight straw that broke the camel's back, where I woke up one morning and I was a marathon runner and very high energy and raising 4 children. And then I had this 10 pounds of puffiness all over my body. Joints were red and inflamed and swollen. And I got in and I was diagnosed. And when I was given these 2 prescriptions for methotrexate and a really strong non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, I asked my doctor, is there anything else I can do? Because I am very disciplined and I will do whatever, I make all my food from scratch. I'll do whatever I need to do. And she said, I am afraid that you have drawn the short end of the genetic lottery because my grandfather had it.
Oh,
so, it's kind of like close the book, put it on the shelf. That's it. And I remember, that her last words ringing in my ears, it was, when you get sicker, come back and we'll change your classification of medications.
Wow.
And
so not if, but when.
Not if, but when. And no, diet has nothing to do with this, and there's nothing else you can do. And I'm driving home thinking, there has to be. And, getting home, going from the car to the internet. And at those days, it was a dial-up modem with ASCII. It was not Google, a fast computer. And I just remember looking up like alternative ways of dealing with autoimmunity. And up in our, where we keep our medical research in PubMed, came an article right away for yoga and autoimmunity. And I remember the very next day I was in my first yoga class of my whole life. And you have to remember that I'm 54 now, and this was when I was 30, so it was a lot of time ago. And there wasn't a yoga studio in every corner next to a Starbucks. That, this was fairly unusual where I lived. And I just remember being really worried because as a marathon runner, I was not that flexible. And when the yoga teacher came through and was talking as you're holding a posture, and started talking about this word Ayurveda, it intrigued me enough that I went home and asked Jeeves about Ayurveda. And I discovered that we are not all the same, which was so revolutionary to me. This idea that we're not standardized people, that we should apply standardized medicine to. That actually we're all very different, and we have to feed and water and take care of ourselves in very different ways according to who we are. And I remember thinking, this makes so much sense. This is why people have all those bad reactions to medications. This is why one person can follow one diet and it works great and another one doesn't work great, and it just was sort of like the clouds burst and the angels began to sing, and it just made so much concrete, critical thinking sense. And so I started applying it to myself. And as I dove deeper into this 10,000-year-old framework of medicine, one of the other things they said is that autoimmune disease is actually undigested anger. And I just remember thinking, like, I'm not an angry person.
Damn it.
I'm angry about that, and so that was a really fascinating philosophical paradigm shift for me of, oh, we have to digest our emotions the same way we digest our food. And that digestion is, we already know that digestion is the root important thing of health and illness. Actually, it's where they both begin. But this idea that we have to digest our beliefs and our meanings and our behaviors and our experiences and our feelings, that was brand new to me. And so I sat in meditation one day because I was learning how to meditate, and this word autoimmune was dancing in front of my third eye space. And I thought, autoimmune means I'm attacking me. I'm killing myself in a societally acceptable manner. What is it that's doing that? But more importantly, when did I first want to die? Because at this moment, I don't. And so I tracked this little golden bread trail back through my life, and I landed on this little girl version of myself that was being sexually abused by the vice principal in my elementary school. And I remember that 10-year-old little girl was very frightened, actually didn't want to live, couldn't understand what was going on. And I thought, this has to be connected. And so I started doing some really in-depth trauma work, as well as changing my diet, learning how to meditate, practicing yoga, doing the things that were right for my body type. And within 6 months, my autoimmune disease was reversed. And not only that, but I was caring for myself in the ways that were appropriate for what my body, mind, heart, and spirit were asking for, not what I was being told is good self-care. Now that was an important thing because, in those days we thought running was good for you, right? And so I was running 26.2 mile races all the time, and it was just beating the crap out of me. And so, it's like, oh, we have these different ways that we're supposed to be doing things. And it was very illuminating, and probably the best thing that ever happened to me was to get diagnosed with an autoimmune disease so I could really learn how to take care of myself.
Yeah. And I love that you bring up that idea that there isn't a one size fits all, and what, running for you might have been the balm until it wasn't. And so even in our own systems, something that was really nurturing can shift and actually become depleting.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. It's important to look at all of those pieces, and reevaluate self-care day to day, minute to minute, because some mornings sleeping in is more nourishing, and sometimes getting up at 5 a.m. to go work out is really nourishing. And we have to really give ourselves permission to be in tune and not just follow somebody else's protocol.
Well, I wrote a book many years later called Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle. And in it, I give all this ways that you can actually listen to the feedback of your body, your mind, your heart, and your spirit, so that you can actually determine what that is, based on what does your tongue look like, what are the lines on your face mean, Botox, because then you can't read it, your bowel movements, your urine, your body odor, your fingernails, all these things that are feedback mechanisms from our body, our skin. I had acne as a teenager and took Accutane. Okay. Like all these things that I can now look back on and say, oh, well, this contributed to leaky gut. Oh, this contributed to, the turning on the expression of that gene that my grandfather passed down to me for RA, but then the ability to turn it so that it's not expressing itself. Yeah. That is under our control. And it is a whole recipe of self-care activities. And so that are designed directly to your genetics, your level of toxicity, what the feedback is of your body, what your digestive system is doing, and how you're managing your stress. And so it's really, really fascinating that we keep trying to make everything very prescriptive, even in the natural health world, of matching the symptom to whatever it is we say, instead of actually tuning in here.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I love that you bring up the epigenetics, this idea that, yeah, sure, we have a gene code, but what turns those genes on or off is actually well within our control. And I think, there's this body of work called, the ACE studies, and we're going to talk about that. But I think that's, for me, one of the most eye-opening things is that we can all have had trauma, little t trauma, big t trauma, one event or ongoing events in our lives. And yes, that can code our biology to a certain degree, but by actually tending to that in a healing sort of way, we actually have way more control over how that actually impacts not just our mental health and well-being, but our physical health as well.
Right, exactly. So yeah, the ACEs study, this was a fascinating study, the largest of its kind that was conducted between 1995 and 1997 by the Centers for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente. And the way it even came to be was because Kaiser Permanente was running a weight loss clinic. And it was a really good program that people were getting to their goal weight and they were being successful. But a lot of them were dropping out before they reached goal weight in spite of the fact that they were getting success. And so the clinic, the program director decided to take a look and find out what was going on and interviewed these folks. And turned out that most of them had been sexually abused in childhood. And so that became a little bit of a head scratcher. And so he combined with the CDC, and they did a larger study of over 17,500 participants and asked about 10 different forms of, you could say, capital T trauma, domestic violence with watching mom undergo that, or having your own physical, sexual, mental, psychological abuse, or having a parent that was addicted to a substance, or having divorce in your family, having a parent die, someone incarcerated. Any form of neglect or abandonment was listed in these 10 items. And over 2/3 of that over 17,000 population actually had an ACE score of at least 1, and 80% of those had an ACE score of at least 2. And, Dr. Folletti was reported to have broken down and wept when he saw these results, because it just was so heartbreaking to him. And indeed, when you look at national statistics, there are more people touched by something like this than there are not. More normal than not. And a lot of times when people will hear me talk about this, they'll say, oh, well, I had a really good childhood and this didn't happen to me. And I always say, but every single person's had trauma. It just depends on where your bar is set. And any experience of rejection in childhood is actually experienced as trauma by the brain. And so when you have 2 friends on the playground one day and the next day they're talking bad about you and you've been left out of the clique, that's actually a trauma. I remember doing therapy. I'm a psychotherapist as well as a medical provider. And on this man who had come to me because I live in Seattle. It's the land of Microsoft and Amazon and Boeing and Starbucks and a lot of engineers who have to give big presentations. And he was just getting social anxiety where he would turn red and he'd sweat and his shirt would be wet when he would get up there, and he came to me asking for anything to help him. And when I started asking him questions, it turns out that when he was in middle school, he had tripped and fallen in the cafeteria, and his cafeteria tray had gone flying, and it was right in front of this girl that he really liked, and everybody in the cafeteria started laughing at him. He spent the next 2 years in the library eating his lunch. And his meaning that he created about himself, this is the hurt study that I did, is that when you have one of these events like this, as a child, your brain's not fully developed. This prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until you're 26 years old. So you have this undeveloped brain, and then you have these experiences of rejection or neglect or abandonment that you can't explain. And as a child, you're very self-centered. You're supposed to be. You're trying to figure out how to be a big human as a little human in this world of humanity and chaos. And so you're going to make up stuff that actually fits your self-centric belief system. So when he tripped, the meaning he made up is, I'm just stupid and clumsy. And the belief that he had is that no one could possibly ever like him because he's so clumsy and stupid. And so the behavior that he used as an adaptive response to that belief is to hide. So whenever he was asked to get up in front of a big group in a corporate boardroom, he would go into this complete shock state. And it was because he was going back to being 12 again and humiliated, and rejected in his own mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where in fact, all those kids were laughing like, thank God that's not me. It was like this sort of expression of, this built up tension that can happen in a room when something like that happens that we're all afraid of, right? But he made it about him. And that's what we all do. If you go back to where I was being sexually abused at the age of 10, I would go into school and the intercom would go off, the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. And we would stand up and we'd say the Pledge of Allegiance. But that's also how I got called to the principal's office. So every time that thing would flicker into action, didn't matter what was being said, I would go straight into, like Pavlov's dog, into a fight or flight response.
Sure.
And so, my meaning was, because the vice principal was telling me it was because I was a bad kid, was that I had to be perfect to even survive. Not even perfect to be accepted or loved or approved of, but to survive. And so that became my behavior also, was to be a perfectionist. So when I was running marathons as an adult, I had a personal record. I was always trying to beat it. I was so hard on myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would be the best at everything that I could possibly be, not competing with anyone else, but with myself. And that is not a sustainable plan of life, actually. So,
I think a lot of us can relate to that, though.
Everyone with autoimmunity has perfectionism as well as undigested anger. That's one of the things Ayurveda says. So, this HERT study actually explained why the ACEs study outcomes were what they were. The ACEs model says if you have an ACE score of 1 or more, the higher the ACE score, the higher your risk for all the chronic diseases we see in our culture today: heart disease, cancer, autoimmunity, promiscuous sex, sedentary lifestyle, any of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
As well as the higher the ACE score, the least likely you are to take care of yourself with self-care activities. Because the meaning you create when you're a kid is, I'm not worth protecting. So the higher your ACE score, the lower your ability to take, well, it's not even your ability, but your resolve to do self-care activities, and the higher your likelihood of self-sabotage. So, I'm sure you've had many patients that come in and say, I'm really good for a while, and then I'm really bad, right?
Yeah, sure.
This is why it's not actually about willpower or behavioral change and setting up little calendars and goal sheets and gold stars, it's not that. It's really getting back to healing this very first hurt. The HERT study is healing unresolved trauma. So really going back and doing that. So the last thing I want to sort of like circle that all around with is that when I was doing the HERT study for my PhD, I actually mapped all these brains. I looked at PET scans from, oh my gosh, thousands of them. And what I was looking for, interestingly enough, was I was doing a study on female sexual desire. Does it go down with the higher the trauma level? And indeed, like everyone would guess, yes, that is true. So what I found when I was mapping these brains is the same parts of the brain that are responsible for women to have sexual desire are the same parts of the brain that get hijacked with PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or trauma. And in fact, what I found on this is a shrinkage, is what the research shows, a shrinkage in the prefrontal cortex when you have PTSD, and a growth in the amygdala, the right side of the amygdala in particular, which is your fight or flight limbic system. But the most interesting thing about this is there was a study that I uncovered that said it isn't just PTSD. It isn't just that capital T trauma from the ACEs study. It's actually lowercase t trauma, which is chronically stating you are overwhelmed. Chronic daily stress that you perceive for yourself is stressful. So I'm one of the busiest people I know, but I don't get stressed by it because it's my dharma. It's something I love. It's like my mission in this world. And so I don't feel stressed by it. And so my body doesn't react in a way that is a stress response to it. But if I were to look at my calendar every day and see how full it is and go, oh my gosh, I can't keep up, I can never do, all these things, and I let it interfere with my self-care, then I would actually have brain shrinkage in my prefrontal cortex, which is the adult brain responsible for impulse control. In other words, it's the thing that keeps you out of the Reese's Pieces or the, or the ice cream in the
If you can tell me what that thing is, I'm listening.
or the bread or the pasta or, like all of those things that people reach for energy, that say they know they're not good for them and not the right thing to be doing for themselves. That if there's been this shrinkage because you consider yourself chronically overwhelmed, then you don't have good impulse control. So you're going to go shopping to feel better, retail therapy, or you're going to use food to self-soothe, or you're going to use alcohol or pot or whatever, you name it, right? All the things that we are always trying to get people to heal these addictions. So that circles it all around.
Yeah, no, I think that's fascinating, because I can't tell you how many people come in, and I even notice this with sugar in particular, kind of I've gotten rid of that and I've done the thing and I know I feel better, and what's bringing me back here? And then that kind of creates more of that negative feedback loop. Is I'm just not strong enough. I'm not I don't have enough willpower. I'm not good enough.
What's wrong with me?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so it doesn't have anything to do with that. That's the beauty. And so that's why I run these deep immersion retreats for people, is to come actually get to that trauma that started it. And you don't even have to reinvestigate that. You don't have to relive it. You don't have to dig it out. What you do have to get to is, what's the meaning I made up?
Okay.
I lay this out in Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle. What's the belief I created? And then what's the behavior that I used as an adaptive strategy that now I get an opportunity to self-confront? Is this the adaptive strategy that's actually going to take me to the finish line of my life in a happy, joyous, vital way? Or is it draining me of life force energy? So now I have an opportunity to reframe that so I can reclaim my power. And so then I can be in a space where I have a lot more resilience emotionally and mentally, which doesn't drive me to these self-soothing activities that are not helping me. And so that's the darling word of the anti-aging world now, is resilience. But it's actually true with autoimmunity. The more hypervigilant your mind is, the more you're looking for people to hurt you, the more you're looking for yourself to be stressed or looking for offense or whatever those beliefs are that you have from childhood, the more hypervigilant your immune system will be. Because whatever's in your mind crystallizes in your body. And so when you're able to really focus here first, then everything can follow.
Okay.
You can't start with the other way around. Like, I'm going to have this great self-care regimen that I'm putting, together, and then feel like a failure when you can't follow it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to reiterate what you're saying, because for me, it's a real aha moment. And I think you're nailing it, which is a lot of us try to put the wellness plan or the self-care plan into place, and we don't know why we can't get there, because there's a part of us that knows it's exactly what we should be doing, and there's a part of us that really wants it, but there's this other part that kind of we keep more at a distance in those darker places where we don't want to go and we work really hard to avoid.
Right.
But what I think I hear you're saying is that without going to those darker, more uncomfortable places to kind of just not even, process and intellectualize the whole thing, but just to name, like, this happened and it impacted me.
Right.
Especially when we're younger, we don't have the language for that, or we're told that shouldn't have been a big deal.
And the thing of it is the people around us, if we don't have the right language, and we don't as children, I didn't have words like abuse. I didn't know that word. I didn't know sexual molestation for sure. I was raised with no TV. I was very, very naive. And so when I was told this is my fault, then I felt like, I don't really want to say too much because I might get in more trouble than I'm already getting in at school, And so I would say to my mom, I don't want to go to school. I have a headache, right? And I would cry before going to school. And, that's a real dramatic change in behavior, because I've always been a deeply ingrained nerd. I really love to learn, always, and so that my mom, didn't really notice this dramatic change in behavior and sent me to school anyway. And it and to her credit, she didn't have these words that came out clearly from me that said, this is what's going on. I need your help. So, and my dad was out to sea. I was a Navy brat. And so, it's this really interesting thing that we now know in developmental expansion of consciousness work that we have these 10 levels of development that we go through in adulthood. And this isn't widely known, and I just love it. It's a TED Talk that I've put together, and it's my next book. And it's really taking these big traumas and challenges that we have in life that we always want to run away from, and saying, oh, this is that moment that I'm called to actually find a mentor, learn a new skill. If any of you are listening to me that have given up sugar or have given up gluten, like I, for the last 25 years have done, it's really hard when you first start, and you have to learn this. And it feels like it's this complete uphill climb. And I see this overwhelm in my patients' faces when I'm going through, these lifestyle changes to have their genes express themselves differently. And they're so overwhelmed. And then gradually, they start learning it, and then after a while, it's like second nature. I think of the bread on the restaurant table as rat poison. I would never even want to even look at it, and so, and it's not that I have to work with myself anymore with it. It's not like, oh, take that away. I can't be near it because it's so tempting. It just is nothing anymore. And so that takes a long time to get there. And I think people feel like they're somehow deficient if they can't just instantly start doing the things that are good for their bodies, and not realize that, oh, this is my next level of development. And if you think about levels of development being sort of like a chicken coming through an egg and hatching, you're hatching into your next level of development. If you've ever seen a chick hatch, it is hard work. Like they're pecking from the inside out. And when they finally are hatched, they just lie there, and anything can come along and eat them at that point. It's like a butterfly coming out of the cocoon for an hour. It has to sit there and dry its wings, and anything can nab it. You're very vulnerable feeling, and you feel very weak when you move through your next developmental state. But once you're there, now you're strong and you're at this new level. And each time we are called to move to another developmental level, it is accompanied by a massive challenge. Mm-hmm. And that can be disease, it can be divorce, it can be getting fired from a job or a special needs child, it can be a loss in the family. But always it's going to be something huge. And I think redirecting ourselves to, when I'm in the middle of a challenge, I need sugar, to when I'm in the middle of a challenge, I understand now what's happening and I'm welcoming it and I'm looking for the new skill set I'm supposed to learn and taking care of myself through it. Mm-hmm. Because if I think of it like, metamorphosis of a caterpillar to a butterfly, I know it's going to be hard work. And I think we just don't expect that, and we should. Mother Nature shows us, that life is not that easy, and we just live ourselves in front of computer screens, and we forget, that there are all these big upheavals happening on the planet around us as Mother Nature shifts, and we go through new seasons, and that it's supposed to be pretty dramatic. But humans just kind of want it to go along like that, and that's not a realistic expectation. So we get off our center, and then we reach for chocolate.
Right. And it's okay to feel into those uncomfortable places. And I think that's part of it too. I always think about when we're driving in our car, and now that, most cars, there's even dual, heating and cooling. So the passenger and the driver don't have to tolerate each other's.
Right. Or beds that do different things on both sides. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so I think we're so accustomed to having exactly what we want to eat and exactly what we want to listen to and staying exactly the same temperature, that we're very
in control.
Yes. And having all the,
control, right? Which, again, all you have to do, I have this office window out here, so I'm always pointing outside. Like out there, it's telling us all the time, we don't have control, we never will. And any sense of control you think you have is just an illusion. And life will teach you.
Right. Yeah, I read this thing once that was saying, we're on an orb that's spinning at an incredible rate, that's then itself rotating around a ball of fire. Like if you think that you're in control of anything, you're crazy. That's just not happening. But we like to reiterate that in each other and ourselves. And so I think we get very frightened anytime that uncomfortable stuff comes up, and that's kind of a signal to retreat away from it, or our mind wants to interpret it like, see, told you, as soon as we open that door, it's going to hurt and I'm going to shut her down. And so it's just really acknowledging that logical part that wants to protect and choosing anyway, because I think what part of what I'm hearing is that we've got to find that intrinsic motivation to make deep change, because if you do it because your doctor told you, it's not going to take you very far.
It won't. And then you'll just wind up being frustrated and say, well, this doesn't work. I've spent all this money and it doesn't work, and that in and of itself is an excuse for not diving deeper into the places where it will work for you.
Yeah. Well, so then if someone is working with autoimmune or history of trauma, or even just trying to make lifestyle changes, kind of where do you recommend people jump in?
I always like for people to start with watching their language, and I don't really mean, shit, damn, and hell. I mean, really watching your language about how you speak to yourself. Mm-hmm. How often is there, I can't, I won't, I should, I shouldn't, or are you hard on yourself? Like, I can't believe I just did that, or
I have to.
We have a funny thing in my family that we over exaggerate that, where we'll just sit there and go, dummy, 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 It's like this very funny caricature of somebody that's just like being so hard on themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And then we have this very funny thing. I have 4 kids and they're all grown now, and we'll go to the one that's doing that and go, oh, hey, it's okay, And it's like this, what you're supposed to be doing for yourself, soothing and saying, oh, that's something that I need to learn new. And that's another expectation I think people have, is that once they learn something, they've got it, therefore they shouldn't be challenged again, and not realizing that it keeps happening. Like we live in a massive computer game. Once you get one level mastered, you'll go to the next level. And so I always tell my patients, don't be in too big of a hurry, because once you get to the top, you die. So.
Absolutely.
Process, right? Well, we want to use your language.
Yeah, well, I think that's a huge mindset shift is that, this idea that we're not trying to check the boxes. Like, okay, I did the self-care thing. I took care of myself, and I see that a lot. Like, well, I go to the gym every morning, and it's like, well, while that's awesome, if you're seated for the next 8 to 10 hours, or you're not taking a break to eat your lunch, or you feel overwhelmed.
What's your mindset while you're in the gym? Are you looking at yourself and going, just a little lift here. Oh, it's so gross looking. I can't, and you're embarrassed about the way your body looks, and you're body shaming yourself, instead of like being super grateful while you're lifting your weights about this body that performs so well under such an amazing amount of stress, and feet that carried you there, and teeth that you got to brush that chew your food, and the eyes that are there for you to see your way to get to the gym, or are you just critical the whole time of yourself while you're there? You're actually not doing yourself any good. It's like running in a bunch of pollution, where you have to wonder, am I doing myself any good as I'm inhaling this exhaust from the bus that just went by me? It's the same thing. We get this toxicity in our heads, and then you have to wonder, is what you're doing while you're having all this toxicity actually doing you any good? And so, you got, that's why the inner language is so important, and why I think about, I don't know, there's a whole nother discussion around Epstein-Barr and Lyme, and I always call them a mindset, because people read things about them and go, oh, that's why I'm sick. So I just need to focus on my Epstein-Barr, or I need to focus on my Lyme. And I'm just like, well, no. That's one piece of the puzzle. It's a toxin, it's an infection, but it's not the smoking gun. It's one part of the entire picture. And the other part of it is, how are you in response to it? Like, I have Lyme and Epstein-Barr, and it never has slowed me down. It's like, oh, hi guys, let's figure out how to work as a team,
Well, I love this, because this whole idea of mindset is so important. And I think that, when we started talking today, we talked about, most people perceive their surroundings and their to-do list for the day and their life in general is overwhelming at this point. I feel like overwhelm is truly an epidemic.
Number one word I hear
is overwhelm, right? Yeah.
Overwhelmed.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, it's such a perception, like you were saying before, like we could be busy in the same way and you're having the best day ever. And I'm feeling totally burdened by the weight of it all. But it's the same workload, you know? So how do we kind of shift that perception?
That requires some, you know, I have a graphic in one of my books that is a dog chasing its tail. Okay. And it's right next to a brain chasing its spinal column. And what I talk about is the dog chasing is TAIL and the brain chasing is TALE. You know, it's really about your story. And so that comes from childhood. The hurt model is really so much about where 50% of people have what we call resistance to life, and everything is hard. And it doesn't matter how easy things are, it will always be hard. And this happens sometimes in utero. And so doing this work, like that's again why I do these retreats, is because we can actually switch that. We can go from resistance to life to embracing life and all of its challenges. Now, that does not happen overnight. It is a practice. You can think of it like a spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it is half the population from what I've been seeing of people that are, and this is what it'll show up. If you have resistance to life, your symptoms are going to be things like, I'm overwhelmed all the time. This thing that you're asking me to do is way too hard. That's too much. I can't possibly do that. You know, like all those things are that's why I say watch your language, so that you can kind of figure out if you fall in this category, because that actually has to be healed. You really do have to choose, you know, if you have Lyme and Epstein-Barr, you got to choose those critters too. They're a part of your life. And instead of fighting constantly against something, which is resistance to life, then you're throwing antibiotics after it, you're ruining your gut, you're creating all kinds of, you know, comorbidities with it. Mm-hmm. And I just look at this and I go, stop madness, you know? Right. And we're just making people so sick. And then we do the same thing with food, where we give them orthorexia. We say this food is bad and this food is good, you know, and then we switch it up when we do their testing again. And then they're locked into this idea. People with resistance to life are going to be like, this is what I do. And then they're going to have a hard time shifting, like, oh, this is what my body needs now. And so there's not very much resilience and not much flexibility. And when that happens, there's a rigidity inside your entire organ system, your endocrine system, your gastrointestinal system, your immune system, all of it gets affected. Sure. So that resistance to life is kind of the root of the root of the root. And, you know, in a retreat setting, I help people move out of that, but it's definitely not like talk therapy. And that's one of the talks I give a lot is, you know, when you're like a dog chasing your tail, or TALE, you cannot, because you're the one that created the problem, you can't then create the solution with the same mind. You actually need to have somebody who's really good at pattern recognition and trauma healing to be able to help you. I call it borrowing a brain. And I know I did a lot of that, you know, for myself. I went to somebody and boy, did I have some stuff that had to get healed as far as attitudes and mindsets and my story. I was such a victim. Mm-hmm. And now I am not that at all, but it's 25 years of doing this, you know? So I always tell people, be patient and then just take the first step. And it's all about healing these belief systems that were created a long time ago. It has nothing to do with the husband that you're in conflict right now. It's actually way back here, and now your husband is pushing your buttons. Right. The buttons that were built a long time ago.
Right. Yeah.
We always want to make it about the boss or about the job or about the kid on heroin or whatever it is, right? Instead of going back to how is it that I decided to be in my life when I have a challenge? And so, yeah.
Yeah. And am I willing to listen to what comes up rather than numb out or run away from it?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that plays such a huge role in creating self-care practices is if we don't And I love what you say, starting with the language, because if we don't know what we're saying to ourselves, and we're not even aware of the messages we continually offer ourselves, then even the most beautifully crafted self-care plan is going to fall flat on its face.
It is, because like, well, 80% of autoimmunity is diagnosed in women, which is why I talk about it a lot. And most women don't know they have autoimmune disease. They come into someone like you or me, and we then diagnose them with that, but they've had years of issues, right? And when you think about resistance to life, it's like, that's autoimmunity. You're resisting, you're at war with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're resisting nourishment, you're resisting everything that you actually crave, but there's some resistance in there that has gone off the rails. And so we have to fix that in order for that resilience and that full nourishment and digestion to occur on all levels.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's a more complicated discussion, but that's ultimately why self-care dies, in its embryonic stages with us on New Year's Day.
I feel like January is the worst month for resolutions. It's spring. We should start doing our resolutions now.
I know.
So do you think it's possible to heal kind of physically, energetically, hormonally? I mean, all these different layers that, you and I both probably bring to our own worlds, and then all of our patients bring in. I mean, it can feel really complicated and overwhelming, and I think, like you said, started out with your story, the Western medical model is, best of luck as you progress through this until you die or get totally disabled in your world.
Right. Until you're put on 5 medications that all have side effects that we need to put you on medications for.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the thing of it is it is totally reversible. Even the brain stuff with the shrinkage of the prefrontal cortex, it's all reversible. I would never talk about anything and then say, well, you're screwed. I'm all about talking about things that you can regain power with, and so you can change your brain shrinkage and develop a large prefrontal cortex. You can actually shrink your amygdala, that fight or flight, but you have to do it in a way that is not talk therapy. And you have to do it with somebody that's really an expert at trauma release therapies and recognizing this idea of resistance to life. Because you can spend, research tells us 20 years in the talk therapy office will actually make a change on your compass, but that's it. 20 years is a long time.
And expensive.
Yeah, and you can actually go out with your girlfriends and do that, and that's got its place. It's a good place. Venting is good. But ultimately, if you actually want brain changes and rewiring, you have to do something different. And so there are different modalities that have popped up that are like, promise you they'll rewire your brain. But then you also have to fix your endocrine system and your microbiome and look at your genetic expression. And so that's why I do all of that, because I think about anything chronic having 4 corner pieces of a puzzle. And we're all very unique in our puzzles, but they are these same 4 corner pieces. And they are, number 1 is your genetics. Number 2 is your level of toxic exposure and your body's ability to get rid of those toxins. Number 3 is your digestive health. Everyone with autoimmunity has leaky gut. And then number 4 is your current day stress and your past trauma. And you have to do them all at the same time. And so people always want to take one thing at a time, and that doesn't work because they're all very interconnected, right? You can't just now with the whole advent of lots of people doing nutrigenomics, there are companies that will take your genetic testing and they break it down into just a few what we call single nucleotide polymorphisms or SNPs and things that are out of whack on your genetic profile, and they'll give you things to do for that one thing, which is just exactly how we do medicine. It's taking this one thing out of context and saying, here's this thing to make it change, and takes out of context the entire picture.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work.
Right.
And so, it's kind of making me crazy a little bit. Can you tell?
I'm like so simpatico with you. I totally get what you're saying. I'm so there. Yeah. It's like, that is not magnesium chelated in the perfect way is not the answer.
I know.
It
Not the
not
one
hurt.
thing.
It's not
the one thing. I know.
Yeah.
Everyone wants the one thing. And, you can understand that. We live in a place where we like to have A plus B equals C, and have it very linear. But unfortunately, our bodies are not linear.
Yeah.
And so everyone wants their immune system to be very linear, and it's very arbitrary. It matches your mind. Your immune system matches your mind. How it reacts is going to be how reactive your mind is.
Mm-hmm.
So think about how arbitrary we are. It's very interesting. Ayurveda has this really beautiful model where they talk about the panchakoshas, 5 layers of being.
Okay.
You have your physical structure that has your DNA and it has your organ systems. And then you've got your second layer is your energy body. And that's where your chakra system meets your physical system and your aura or electromagnetic energy field. And then your next layer is going to be your emotional, mental, and the next one is wisdom, and the last one is called the bliss sheath or Anandamaya Kosha. And it's the place that you actually access what Carl Jung called collective unconsciousness. So all wisdom is available to all of us. And we all want that place, right? We want access to that at all times. But if we're toxic in any of these other layers, we can't get there all the time. And so it's just realizing and recognizing that there's a lot more to it than, like you just said, chelated magnesium or CoQ10 that's ubiquinol versus not,
Right. Methylated, whatever.
I know. I know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or methylfolate versus methylcobalamin. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And which MTHFR SNP you have. I mean, we keep trying to do this reductionist way of thinking, and that's not actually it's not relative to our reality, it's just another paradigm that isn't working. And it's very much like Western medicine. And so it's making people frustrated. They're spending a lot of money and they're not getting anywhere. And I'm, a big proponent for looking at the entire picture all at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure you see this too, but the patients that I see that have had that 23andMe testing and that sort of stuff, and they're taking a lot of supplements, upwards of 20 different pills and pill bottles, and it's burdensome, and they're not having very much fun, which is why they're coming to see me, because I don't do that stuff. And I think that's such a cue in for all of us, right? Is that if this doesn't feel like it's working, it's not working. And even if you have the premier expert in the field of, epigenetics and genomics at this time, it doesn't necessarily mean if it's not a fit for you, then you get to honor that. And I think that's one of the first steps in healing, especially autoimmune, and starting to do self-care, because if self-care starts feeling like a burden, now you're just adding to that system of overwhelm.
Right. And I mean, I put people on supplements. Sometimes they're very burdensome, lengthy protocols, but they last for a finite period of time.
Yep.
And then they're not doing that, and it's just to get you balanced, to get you back into that homeostasis place. And then I don't want you dependent on supplements. And so, it's an interesting kind of, I guess, razor's edge that we have to walk with, like the contamination and pollution of our environment and our minds. Mm-hmm. Versus, what we need to do for nourishment and proper digestion and detoxification. And we're always having to adjust that. It's not going to stay the same throughout the seasons of the year and the times of your life. And that's always going to be shifting. Mm-hmm. So that's where testing comes in really handy. And then you being able to adjust your self-care to match what your body's asking you for.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, tell me a little bit more about the health certification, the health coach certification program that you run, because I know folks might be interested in kind of diving a little deeper into some of the stuff that you're bringing together in a really unique way.
So this is my legacy project, the throwing myself into the pond and having the ripples, is really helping people understand. I like to train people to do what I do, to really help them understand how to recognize emotional stuff and be able to appropriately refer or give the proper tools, triage it. I call it triaging trauma, to be able to individualize what's going on based on some specific testing. So I teach some functional medicine testing, and I also teach functional sexology, and I teach the emotional trauma triage techniques that I use, and some really amazing Ayurvedic pieces along with that. And so if anybody is really passionate, I always call these people that I built this program for the summit junkies. They were my patients. I mean, I started with these people that would come in with these binders that of all this information they gathered. They were smarter than most doctors. And everyone else was coming to them for advice and help. And I said, you just need to learn how to individualize this. You have this amazing amount of intelligence, but you haven't learned how to actually personalize it. And how about if you learn how to do this so you can make a living out of it, since everyone's already coming to you?
Right.
So it's the people that are really passionate, that have their own stories, like we do, and who have reversed their child's thing or theirs, and really live this. If you want to learn how to make a living out of it, that's what I teach.
Oh, cool. Okay, great. Well, I'm really looking forward to reading your book, The Autoimmune Puzzle. That sounds really fascinating. And again, like you're drawing on a lot of different traditions and modalities and really weaving them together nicely with a lot of research, which I think is really important to base what we're doing on, what is actually happening here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anything else that you'd like to add around folks who are, working with autoimmune or trying to really create more self-care, more space for self-care?
Yeah, just really, if you find that you are somebody that says that I self-sabotage myself, or I'm good for a while and then I'm bad, knowing that you need to do your emotional work. And if you say to me in response to that, well, I've done so much work around this already, then you've only gotten to the layer that you're at, and there's more to go if you're still not able to crack this. And so it doesn't matter if you've done a lot of work already, it's gotten you to where you are, and now it's the next layer, and I always tell my patients the same thing a therapist told me very wisely long ago, when I said, really, I'm here again? And she said, oh, grasshopper, this gold mine is the shaft that you go down, that you get these nuggets of wisdom out, will be the thing you are mining for the rest of your life. And that was a really good perspective shift for me. Like, oh, okay. These things that happened to me in childhood are actually these beautiful shafts that I can go down and mine my nuggets of wisdom for the rest of my life, and pull out the gems, that I now share with other people. It came from having to go down into the dark and, with a pickaxe and start breaking it loose. So I think that shifting that is really important. And so just know I think everyone needs to be doing that work.
Yeah. And I'm thanks for bringing that up, because I think a lot of people who are watching have done a lot of work up until now and kind of feel like that chapter is closed. And
I
same thing
know.
with my provider, when I'm rolling my eyes like, this again,
I know.
And he's like, you roll your eyes all you want, sweetheart, but this is what's here and we're going into it. And I always get something new. And I've been working some of these pieces for a long time, but there is another layer of insight. So I always think about more like a spiral. So like you might be circling the same theme, but you're deepening into it as you're exploring it again. And there's another layer, which if you let it, and this is kind of the same thing on changing the perception, is it can be really exciting, and these beautiful nuggets of wisdom if we allow ourselves to perceive it that way, rather than another thing to be burdened by.
And if you find yourself rich with wisdom because of it, then you're excited. Now you're excited to do your work, rather than nervous and, I don't want to live that again. I don't want to dig that up. That's where people start. And that doesn't, that's actually not even accurate. That's not what therapy is about. A good therapy that's about rewiring your brain is not about that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Keesha. We'll look forward to seeing more of you, and be sure to have all of your links in this email.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.